wanted to say congratulations.
Thank you.
So I will call our February 17th, 2021 Transportation Policy Board to order. I want to remind you that this meeting is being held electronically because the Transportation Policy Board determines that meeting electronically is necessary to protect the health, safety, and welfare of Middle Tennesseans in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. If you will make sure when you are voting, if you make a motion or you second an item, if you will state your name, and also if you are voting no, if you will also state your name for the minutes. I want to thank each one of you for being here today. I don't know what it is about Transportation Policy Board, but it seems like anytime something can, there be a hurdle, it happens on these meeting days. So I hope you all are faring the weather well and are preparing for what might come in this afternoon and tonight. We are going to move into item 1, which is approval of the January 20th, 2021 meeting minutes. Are there any additions or corrections that need to be made to the minutes? Hearing no one, do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
This is Rick Graham. I so move.
Thanks, Mayor Graham. Do we have a second? Thanks, Mayor Vogel. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Minutes pass. We'll now move on to item 2, which is our public comment. Is there anyone here that would like to address this board? If so, if you will state your name and the organization in which you represent and the community in which you reside. Okay, seeing no one for public comments, we will move on to our action items, number 3. Our first item is our approving our major update to the Regional Transportation Plan for 2021 through 2045. And today's item in approving this major update to our plan is a culmination of a lot of hard work by a lot of different organizations and individuals. Our Transportation Policy Board, for most of you know, is empowered by federal law to serve as the primary forum for collaboration among our local and state officials in order to negotiate a plan to invest in our roadways, our bridges, our public transit all across Middle Tennessee. In 2016, our body adopted the current transportation plan, and we directed more than $8.5 billion in federal grants and matching funds into our area's transportation system through the year 2040. In October of 2019, we voted to approve about $1 billion of this funding to be put to work across our area between now and 2023. Back in October of 2019, which seems like a lifetime ago, we launched an initiative that was called Solve This Together. As a region, we convened more than 200 community leaders to lay out our strategy for updating our plan. On that day, I called on state and local leadership to do 5 things. 1, I asked that we work cooperatively across political boundaries, levels of government, socioeconomic groups, and economic sectors to identify a shared vision that we all had for our region. The second thing, I asked for us to be ready to prioritize transportation needs based on real-world constraints and limitations, but for us to be willing to negotiate and execute on strategies to overcome obstacles so we can do the things that needed to be done. The third thing I asked was to keep in mind that we're working to make Middle Tennessee a better place so that our kids and our grandkids want to call this place home. We all have immediate needs that had to be addressed, but we had to tackle those in a way that was incremental to our long-term goals. The fourth thing was to think comprehensively about the relationship between transportation decisions and those things that are related to housing, the economy and jobs, land use and community design, environmental quality, historic preservation, social services, and other issues important to Middle Tennesseans. And the fifth thing I asked was to have fun. I understood the sense of urgency, the frustration with the lack of resources, and the anxiety of getting out of our comfort zones. But I wanted us to be inspired by these challenges and not be scared of them. Back then, we had so much energy to take on the massive issue of transportation and to solve it together. Little did we know on that day in October of 2019 what we had to face in the months to come as leaders in our community. While traffic congestion and roadway safety and other transportation issues were still a top priority for our region over the last couple of years, I know firsthand that our local mayors and our communities have spent the last several months doing everything we could to address public health and economic concerns that have been related to COVID-19. During this time, our board and staff continued to press forward to get the regional transportation plan finished on time. This plan is the plan that we have before us today. And I kind of wanted to take you on that journey because I think sometimes we get so caught up in the day-to-day things that we're doing, we forget where we've come from and the things that we've had to go through to get to the point in which we are today. So with that, I will turn it over to Sean so that he can discuss a little bit about the plan. Sean?
Thank you, Mayor Reed, and I appreciate that great introduction and the congratulations. I know that others might be utilizing their home as a office as well as a daycare today, so apologies in advance for any background noise. So I'm going to take you through a couple of slides to try and capture the regional transportation plan. It's a large document, so we're not going to be able to get through everything, but a couple of core requirements that kind of guide the regional transportation plan. It is required by law for metropolitan areas of 50,000 or greater. It is long range, it looks out 20 or more years to account for all of that federal funding that will be coming into our region over that long term and any regionally significant projects. It does have to be fiscally constrained, and so we're only able to identify projects which we have funding available over that long-term horizon. We also have to be focused on addressing the planning factors and national goals. And also, this plan is updated every 5 years, and so we are right on the cusp of that 5-year mark today. Wanted to point everybody's attention. Lou sent around an email that contains a executive summary of the regional transportation plan, and encourage everybody to take a look at this. I think it does a good job of capturing many different components within the plan. I believe it's posted in the link, and Michael will probably recycle that link so you can have direct access if you didn't get the email. But I'll be covering a couple of things today that you'll see within that document as well. So just working through some of the summary of the funding recommendations that are in the plan. We've talked a little bit about this in the past as the funding assumptions. The plan includes $10.5 billion over the next 25 years. And a couple of key points is that we estimate about $260 million of federal funds coming into our region each year. And so as we build that out over the life of the plan, we assumed revenue growth assumptions of 2% annual growth. And so increases in that amount of federal funds over the life of the plan coming into this region. However, we also assumed an inflationary factor of 4% annually to account for the increases in project costs over the life of the plan. And then looking at how that funding is allocated over the life of the plan, kind of the way that we broke it out is into the programmatic investments as well as the specifically identified projects. And so 35% of the funding of that 10.5 billion is set aside for programs that are going to be identifying projects at a later date. This includes buckets of investments for maintenance of the interstate or resurfacing roadways on state routes. It also includes replacement of public transit vehicles to ensure that those fleets are properly maintained over the life of the plan. It includes safety improvements identified through the Highway Safety Improvement Program, as well as active transportation investments through the MPO's Active Transportation Program, as well as the state's Transportation Alternatives Program. And then ongoing calls for CMAQ projects that have air quality improvements through the region. And then of the 65% of funding then is allocated to specific projects over the life of the plan. And so of that 65%, 72% of funding will be used by TDOT to implement projects identified in the Improve Act. And then another noteworthy point is a lot of this funding is also going to prior commitments. So 50% of the funds will be needed to complete projects that are already programmed in the TIP or identified in the short term. Within the executive summary, you'll see this slide. This identifies some of the funding recommendations and tries to group them in similar project types. And so 4 billion in projects are Improve Act projects. Also note that there's a number of about 1.1 billion dedicated to that existing local and regional transit service through federal formula grants over the life of the plan. Call out a couple more of these. About $500 million dedicated to modernizing the downtown interstate loop, which we know is not the full amount of money that we'll need in order to take on the improvements necessary, but is a commitment to addressing one of the largest bottlenecks in the region. Also note that there's about $250 million dedicated to active transportation programs, both the active transportation program identified through the MPO as well as the Transportation Alternative Program identified by TDOT. And then one other to note is for the safety improvements identified through the Highway Safety Improvement Program, about $450 million dedicated to those safety improvements through that program. And these are not mutually exclusive, and so some of these fall under multiple categories, just to be aware of that. So looking at these projects on the map, this map shows those projects that are funded within the Regional Transportation Plan throughout the region. And when we look at that, broke it down to just to get a sense of are those local projects, are those projects being implemented by TDOT? And so you'll see those funded projects in red are those that are being implemented by TDOT or synonymous with the Improve Act projects that we've mentioned. And then those in blue are locally submitted projects. We also mentioned these projects are broken out over the short, medium, and long term in the horizon that they're expected to be completed. And so we've also indicated those projects by the planning horizon, whether it's 2025, 2035 in the midterm, or 2045 in the long term. And then you also see that we have the unfunded needs, which I'll highlight on this next slide. I think it's also worth noting that even with the projects that we are identified through this regional transportation plan, there are yet many unfunded needs, particularly a lot of locally submitted projects, as well as regional priorities that we've identified in previous RTP cycles that are left on the table that do not have identified funding in the short, medium, or long term. And then looking at the funding across the region, we feel that the investments track fairly well across the counties when taking into account the population, the people within those counties, the vehicle miles traveled or the amount of travel within those counties, as well as the infrastructure kind of identified through the federal aid lane miles of the amount of infrastructure within those counties. And so switching gears to kind of some of the public engagement and stakeholder engagement that we've been involved with, both over the life of the plan and then also most recently through the public review and comment period over the last month. And so I think it's worth mentioning, not only some of the traffic to the website, particularly focused on transportation issues and transportation content, but also, the folks that have signed up to be involved in communication through GNRC and wanting to plug into the transportation planning work. We've also mentioned the Solve This Together back in 2019, where we were able to plug in with over 250 community leaders, and followed that up most recently through the having a public workshop that was virtual but had over 115 attendees at that. And then I think it's also worth noting all of the work that you all have put in, both the Transportation Coordinating Committee as well as the Transportation Policy Board, through countless meetings, workshops, joint workshops between both TCC and TPB, approaching nearly 30 just over the past year and a half. And then it's also worth mentioning the number of presentations and meetings that we've had with some of our roundtable groups, like the Environmental Roundtable Committee, as well as the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee, and then a number of presentations to some of the stakeholder groups across the region, just presentations on the regional transportation plan, transportation planning, and just wanted to note a lot of that here. As I mentioned, we had the 30-day public review and comment period over the past month, publicly noticed through these 3 newspapers, and then had the public workshop on February 4th. That was well attended. Some of the feedback and comments that we heard, not only through those events, but also through written comments as well as surveys, kind of revolved around a number of topics, but we tried to kind of categorize them into a couple of different buckets. One common theme that emerged is the need for dedicated funding and additional funding to take on a lot of the ambitious transit solutions that have been discussed over the past decade, as well as some of the transformational projects and regional priorities that we've discussed in this plan and previous plans. Also, another category was the need for additional multimodal investment. There was a number of comments that we received, not only seeking improvements for bike ped safety and active transportation modes, but for a desire for additional multimodal investments beyond some of the roadway capacity adding projects that were contained within the plan. Another comment, I think, revolved around the coordination or perceived lack of coordination. And I think this relates to the funding and identifying kind of how to achieve some of those regional solutions and how how those strategies are going to be shared across the many different partners responsible for implementing some of these solutions. Another comment I think that related to that was just a greater interest in seeing additional analysis and evaluation of equity and equitable outcomes for the region as well. And I know we received a number of comments as well related to electric vehicle infrastructure, and I think this comment at the bottom is, I think, kind of summary of, based on some of the comments we received, is the a need for the region to be doing more and investing in expanding capacity given the growth coming to the region, integrating some of that smart technology into existing and long-standing projects, and then supporting that shift to greener energy and infrastructure. So lastly, just some final thoughts and key takeaways. I know we've talked about this a little bit over the past year, but I think the plan still reflects that the region is largely dependent on federal funding sources to implement transportation investments over the next 25 years. We did the peer comparison of what other metro areas were spending on transportation investments, and when we looked at some of the aspirational peers that you see on this chart, Denver, Atlanta, Austin, you see that their funding per capita greatly exceeds the Nashville area, and a lot of that additional revenue that they are generating for their transportation investments over the long term are coming from additional local, regional, or state revenue sources. And so another item to be aware of as we move forward, kind of what this plan accomplishes, but also what its limitations are. Another takeaway is it is hard to move the needle to improve performance of the system, and just taking a look at some of the forecasts associated with the model, what we see between now and 2045, and then what the impact of those investments are likely to be. We notice that travel speeds are going to get worse in the future, and as we invest in these improvements, we're only able to make it marginally better. And so as those speeds decrease in the region, we're investing just to ensure that to try and maintain those speeds over the long term. And then in looking at the vehicle miles traveled, we also expect more miles traveled and severe congestion between now and 2045, over 100% increase. And that is going to give, with these investments, we're able to add additional throughput. And so we're able to accommodate that growth in vehicle miles traveled that we expect to see over the long term. However, I think we are forecasted to see, even with those improvements of adding roadway capacity, an actual worsening of VMT and severe congestion as a result of induced demand and congestion along those additional congestion along those already congested routes. And so I think that in looking at how difficult it is to move the needle, another point that this highlights is just how critical alternatives to single occupancy vehicle travel are for Middle Tennessee over the next 25 years. And then lastly, we want to note just the ongoing work and additional work that needs to be done. We've identified that additional collaboration, innovation, and additional revenue are necessary for the region to continue to move forward and achieve a lot of those goals of not only building the coalitions necessary to advance some of those transformational projects and investments that we've talked about, but also the necessary collaboration and revenue in order to bring that to fruition. And so we recognize the need to not only build on those coalitions and strengthen those coalitions, but also to identify ways to enhance those projects that are currently in the pipeline to ensure that they are meeting the changing landscape, whether it be the COVID pandemic or the shift to electric vehicles. And so this, with that, those are my remarks, and I can take any questions, or we can move for a motion to adopt.
Before we move to hold our public hearing, are there any questions or comments for Sean? Okay, seeing none, I will ask if there's anyone here to speak for the Regional Transportation Plan for 2021 through 2045. If there are, if you'll come forward and state your name, the organization which you represent, if you do, and the community in which you live. Seeing no one, I'll close the public hearing, and I will go to this board for a motion to adopt resolution TPB 2021-01, approving our major update to the Regional Transportation Plan for 2021 through 2045. Do I have a motion?
This is Moore. Move approval with a comment.
Rick Graham, second.
Okay. Discussion, Mayor Moore?
Well, thank you for the opportunity to just say a quick few words. And first of all, Mayor Reed, you've done a great job leading us during this challenging time to get this plan out. But also, I want to applaud the staff for the great work that they've done. I think there are three great points here: is that we need to continue to collaborate. We need to look for innovations that we can use. And also, we need to continue to figure out how we can generate more revenue. And I think it's a good point, the fact that there is no significant dedicated funding at the current time, and we'll need to continue to all work together moving forward. So thank you.
Thanks, Mayor Moore. Any other discussion?
Yeah, Mayor Reed, this is Mayor Bell with Lebanon.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, my staff, I think, sent a additional project to Anna, ITS Phase 2 to be added. I'm not sure if it got there or not, but I would like to add that to the plan. Thank you.
Sean, can you address that?
I believe it's probably a ITS, or I mean a CMAQ project.
It is
part of the recent round, and so we can work to capture that in the Transportation Improvement Program if it's not already currently on there.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions or comments?
Mayor Reed, this is Faye DeMassimo. Just one small housekeeping comment. The Metro Nashville Transportation Plan, I think in the plan, and at least one location is referenced as Mayor Cooper's plan, and we like to be sure to title it the Metro Nashville Transportation Plan as the community's plan. So if that one small housekeeping edit can be made, we'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Absolutely. Other comments or questions? Okay, we have a motion and a second on the floor. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion passes. I also would like to thank the staff and all of the organizations that were involved on making this plan possible. I don't think it was exactly the vision we had when we met in 2019, but we persevered through, and I just want to thank each one of you for all that you have done. So with that, we will move on to item B, which is updating the regional performance targets in accordance with federal law. Sean?
Thank you, Mayor Reed. I'll start before turning it over to Ashley Reeves. So today, I know we've talked a lot about federal performance measure targets. As we've discussed in the past, this is another requirement as part of the process for state and MPOs to adhere to a performance management approach in carrying out our federally required transportation planning and programming. And this is, as before I dive into this specifics of these align fairly well with the support of national goals. And so for safety to achieve a significant reduction in serious injuries and fatalities, for the goal of infrastructure condition to maintain a state of good repair of the system, and for system reliability to improve efficiency of the highway network. And so as we've discussed in the past, we're taking a multifaceted approach with the performance measure target updates this time in not only supporting statewide targets for two of the three categories that I mentioned, but also adopting regional targets specifically related to safety. And so we're requesting your action today on three different resolutions. One for on roadway safety, for the establishing regional safety performance measure targets for these five different performance measures under that safety category: the number of fatalities, the fatality rate, number of serious injuries, serious injury rate, and the number of non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries. You're most familiar with this target that we update annually. It's on a 1-year cycle versus the other two categories that are on a 2-year update cycle, that being the performance measures associated with infrastructure condition related to the pavement condition on the interstate system and non-interstate NHS system, and the bridge condition for the NHS network. And then as well, system performance is also on a 2-year update cycle. And so the resolutions that you have before you today for your consideration would be to establish the regional targets for safety that align with a long-term goal of a 1% annual reduction in those five measures that you see out to 2045. And then for infrastructure condition and system performance, we're looking for recommending supporting state targets across those measures based on TDOT's recent update. So I'll walk through each of those. We have summary tables on what those targets look like. And so looking through the safety one first, these would be the proposed regional targets. The way that the table is laid out is the first column is the existing baseline based on the historic annual totals for each of those five measures that you see. And then as you kind of work down the table, what we have identified is what a trend line would look like out to 2045, both in the immediate, 1 year, as well as the long-term 2045. And then we've identified in the orange and blue what our target would look like based on that long-term goal. And so Ashley's going to take you through the documentation of how we utilize the baseline and looked at the long-term trend line in order to identify what that immediate target would be for us to consider in order to stay on track with that long-term goal. And so the recommendation would be to endorse these regional targets for safety based on a 1% annual reduction, which is highlighted. The 1 year immediate target that we'd be looking for is highlighted in the orange, and then in the light orange would be the resulting 2017 to 2021 target as it's documented for the federal requirements. And then the next category would be for infrastructure condition. And so for the proposed, supporting proposed state targets, we would recommend endorsing the state targets for infrastructure, which have largely remained consistent with the existing 4-year target that you all adopted back in 2018. One change would be based on the actual performance, there would be an adjustment to the 4-year target for the percent of poor non-interstate NHS pavement from 4% to 5% as identified in this table. And then lastly, for system performance, the recommendation would also be to endorse the state targets for system performance, similar to the infrastructure table based on the actual performance. There's a 4-year adjusted target for one of the measures, that being freight reliability, an increase from the 1.33 to the 1.37. And so with that, I will turn it over to Ashley to walk you through some of the documentation on the safety side. If you had an opportunity to look through your packet, we captured a lot of this documentation within a memo on the safety performance measure targets. But as she'll walk you through this, kind of some of the common terms that you'll see throughout is that the historic represents kind of the path that we've been on and some of those past totals for fatalities, serious injuries, and such. The trend line is the path that we would be currently on into the future. The goal line would be the path that we prefer to take to reach our goal by 2045. And then the baseline represents that point that we're at based on historic totals. And then the target represents the immediate place that we want to be in order to stay on track for that goal line up to 2045. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ashley to quickly walk you through that documentation.
Thank you, Sean. So the first graph, I just want to mention each of the next graphs you're going to see are set up in a similar fashion. You have historic data going back from 2011 to 2020. And that leads us to our baseline, specifically for fatalities of 197. And if we follow the trend line, which is the dark blue line, we would end up with an annual total much higher than if we follow our 1% annual reduction goal. If you go to the next slide, thank you, you already did. If we want to reach our 2045 goal of the 151, we would have to have fatalities below 193 for 2021. And the difference between the trend and our goal would save approximately 2,900 lives. Next slide. Here we have this similar chart for fatality rates. We have a baseline of 0.92 per 100 million vehicle miles traveled. Again, if we follow the trend line, we would end up with a fatality rate much higher than if we follow our goal line. Next slide. And if we want to reach our 2045 goal of 0.53 fatalities per 100 million vehicles traveled, we would need to keep a fatality rate below 0.85 in 2021. Next slide. Here we see the graph for serious injuries. We have a baseline of 1,349.8. Again, the trend line would have us at an annual total at 1,607, much higher than our 2045 goal. Next slide. If we want to reach that goal of 1,039 by the year 2045, we would have to keep serious injuries below 1,323 for the year 2021. And the difference between the trend and our goal would approximately avoid 8,700 injuries. Next slide. Here we have the chart for serious injury rate. The baseline for 2015-2019 was 6.4 serious injuries per 100 million vehicle miles traveled. Again, if we followed the trend line, we would end up with a serious injury rate much higher. In order to hit our target by 2045 of 3.65 serious injuries per 100 million vehicle miles traveled, we would need to keep the serious injury rate below 5.85 for 2021. And final slide. Here we have non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries. The baseline for 2015-2019 was 178.6. We follow the trend line, we end up with a much higher value by 2045 than if we follow our goal. And if you hit the next slide, if we want to reach our goal of 138 non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries by the year 2045, we would have to keep those fatalities and serious injuries below 175 for 2021. And if we could do that, we would avoid approximately 7,300 injuries or lives lost. And with that, I will turn it back over to Sean.
Great, thank you, Ashley. And so just to reiterate, the proposed action for your consideration today would be to, on 3 separate resolutions, one resolution to adopt regional targets for safety based on that 1% annual reduction. The second would be to adopt state targets for infrastructure condition performance measure targets. And then the third for system performance would be to adopt state targets for system reliability performance measures. And with that, we can take any questions or comments.
Seeing no questions or comments for Sean or staff, we're going to vote on these individually. So the first one, I am asking for a motion to adopt resolution TPB 2021-02, which would adopt regional targets for safety. Do I have a motion?
Moore, move approval.
Do I have a second?
Second, Victor Lay.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Our next resolution for adoption is resolution TPB 2021-03, which will be endorsing to adopt the state targets for infrastructure condition performance measures. Do I have a motion?
Motion, Billy Vogt.
Do I have a second?
Second, Herman.
A motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Our last resolution for adoption is Transportation Policy Board 2021-04 to adopt the state targets for system reliability and performance measures. Do I have a motion?
So moved, Victor from Nolensville.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second, Rick Graham.
Thanks, Mayor Graham. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. We'll now move on to our informational items, and our first is the proposed amendments to the fiscal year 2020 through 2023 Transportation Improvement Program. And Anna, I think you're going to take this.
Thank you so much, Mayor Reed. We have 6 proposed amendments for you guys to take a look at today. This is for our second cycle of amendments to the current fiscal year 2021. We'll begin with a request from TDOT for the I-65 widening from State Route 25 to State Route 109 project. They are adding funds to this project for construction. As you can see from the summary sheet in your packets, it's a pretty considerable amount of additional funding for construction, more than double what was previously programmed. The state is targeting eventual use of NHPP funds for this project. However, it's being constructed using a financing mechanism called advanced construction, where they are fronting the construction cost with state funds and will intend to swap that out for federal NHPP funds on the back end. Following that request, we have a request from Metro Nashville for their Charlotte Avenue and MLK Junior Boulevard Connected Transit Technology Project. They received a federal award of Advanced Transportation and Congestion Management Technologies Deployment Funds for this project. So they're requesting to add this project to the TIP with those newly received funds in order to advance this connected transit technology initiative along this corridor. Next, we have a couple of requests from Murfreesboro. They are both for interchange lighting projects. The first of those being at the Veterans Parkway I-840 interchange. So Murfreesboro is requesting to add this project to the TIP with funding that they received 50% of this from TDOT. The other 50% will be coming from Murfreesboro Urbanized Area SDBG funds. And then following that is a request for the other interchange lighting project at Joe B. Jackson Parkway and I-24. Same scenario, receiving funding from TDOT. This is from TDOT's interchange lighting program, by the way, that state funding that they're receiving. And then again, the other 50% from Murfreesboro Urbanized Area funds. After that, we have a request from WeGo for Nashville MTA. This is for their North Nashville Transit Center project. And they're requesting to add Improve Act funds that they received from the TDOT Multimodal Division to this project, adding funds for construction. And then our final request is from RTA for a regional park and ride facility effort that they are going to be pursuing. They received some additional FTA 5307 funds through the CARES Act that they are going to be dedicating to this effort. So they're requesting to add this project to the TIP. That is all presentation wise. I'm happy to take any questions that anybody might have about any of these 6 proposals.
Okay, thanks, Anna. We will move on to item B. Oh, Anna, was there anything else?
No, ma'am, that's all from me on this item.
Okay, then we will move on to item B, which is the nomination committee for the 2021 officers. And let me say how much I have enjoyed being chair of this board and how much I have appreciated all of the help from staff as well as from each one of you that serve on this board. As my final act in this role, I'm appointing a nominating committee to bring back a slate of candidates for chair and vice chair to serve out the remainder of the 2021 calendar year. And I would ask that you all report back in time for our March elections. And I'm asking that the nominating committee consist of Paige Brown from the city of Gallatin, Randall Hutto from Wilson County, and Ken Moore from the city of Franklin. And the elections will be set for March the 17th, and staff will get with you all to set a time up so you all can get together to meet. So we will mark that one off the item, and we will move to our regular reports. And first is Federal Highway, and Pam, are you taking this today?
I am, Mayor Reed. Thank you for recognition, members of the board, Mayor. I just wanted to bring a couple of items to your attention. Secretary Pete Buttigieg has been confirmed officially by the Senate as in place, is working on the new Biden administration's priorities. He is working through several US DOT internal town halls and listening sessions with us so that we can get to know him and he can understand what we've been working on. The priorities that were initially identified in no particular order were for the administration and transportation are COVID response, economic relief, climate change, and equity. So we assume that as we get ahead of the COVID response, that might shift and become safety or another initiative from the administration. But at this point, those are the four that we are focusing on as everything gets stood up at the US DOT. Stephanie Pollock, who had been previously the secretary of the Massachusetts DOT, has been named as the Deputy Administrator of FHWA, and we anticipate that Stephanie will be nominated as the administrator. But as deputy, she can get started now. It is a position that doesn't have to be confirmed by the Senate, where the administrator position does. So she can get started on initiatives that the current administration wants to carry forward, and we anticipate her being nominated, as I mentioned, for administrator at a later time. As far as funding goes, FHWA has released 2 funding amounts as a result of the December 2020 Appropriations Act and Coronavirus Relief Act. So the Coronavirus Response and Relief Act issued about $10 billion across the U.S., of which about 210 million-ish, give or take, is for Tennessee, and from that, about 7.9 million is going to be used, is going to be assigned to the Nashville urbanized area, and I don't know if TDOT is going to discuss that, but I'll stop there just in case. And then on the highway infrastructure program funding that was also issued in around December, $2 billion across the U.S., of which about 30 million is coming to Tennessee, and then there's a similar distribution with around the country, percentages, and some of that may be used in metropolitan areas. It will be up to the state to work with the MPOs and other large cities to determine how that money is going to be distributed around the state. Okay, and with that. The last comment I wanted to make, Madam Chair, is that FHWA and TDOT has recently communicated our expectations to all the MPOs around the state for the next round of UPWPs, which is the work program for each of the MPOs, and that will become effective. Each of the work programs will become effective October 1st. So I think the MPO staff is aware of these expectations, and if there's any questions, please let us know. And I think that's all for me. If there's any questions, I'll be happy to take them. Thank you.
Thanks, Pam. Any questions for Pam or anybody from Federal Highway? Seeing none, we'll move on to the TDOT report. Preston or Matt, I'm not sure who might be taking this today.
It is Preston, and Matt will do a little bit as well, but thank you, Mayor Reed. First off, I want to thank you for your leadership over this last year with the MPO and also staff. I was looking as Sean was going through the presentation on the long-range plan, kind of looking at some of the dates that were set out there. And prior to joining TDOT, I actually participated in the kickoff event back in October of 2019, which seems so long ago. I think probably each of us can think about the many challenges that have occurred since starting the development of your plan. Pandemic, tornadoes, civil unrest, and now some sort of snow tsunami that we are in here in Middle Tennessee. And I think a lot of credit and praise should go to staff for pushing forward in the development of the plan. As each of you know, a plan that an MPO develops is a continuous process. So while it may not have everything that we would want or need, as we improve our understanding and use of data and performance measures and so forth, as we look at the planning process, we'll have opportunities to make improvements in those various areas. And collaborate, as Mayor Moore had mentioned, and seek other opportunities to further advance improved mobility within the Middle Tennessee region. I think staff covered a good amount of information on performance measures and also TIP amendments, and appreciate their work and efforts to making those things happen, and so that we can get needed funding to various organizations, whether it's WeGo or Metro Nashville or the lighting projects down in Rutherford County. I think Pam mentioned a couple of things on the federal funding appropriations, and I believe you should have received a letter from the commissioner kind of outlining our understanding of the dollars available to the large 4 MPOs in the state of Tennessee. And I think it's about 7.9 million. I think the information letter is in your packet, maybe near the very end of the packet. There's also some information on the HIP funding that also is available to areas over 200,000 in population as well. I think probably the most important component of it, and I'm sure that we'll be continuing to work and talk with staff to assist you best that we can, is the whole notion that these funds have an expiration date on them to be obligated by September 30th, 2024. A little bit different than your normal allocation of STBG funds. So I think we're continuing to work with FHWA to make sure that we understand all of the parameters that go with the use of these funds, so we can best inform and advise. And we'll be looking at opportunities to assist you any way that we can in terms of use of your funds to ensure that that you're able to put them to good use. In the letter, and I think most of you probably recognize this, given the impact that COVID has had on our economy, our gas tax revenues are slightly down, but our diesel fuel revenues are slightly up. And the reason for the diesel fuel being up is two-part. One, it's the last incremental increase in the Improve Act funding on the percentage on the diesel. So a portion of the increase in the diesel fuel tax is the actual last increase in the rate. Also, I think that we are not 100% on this, but we think that another component of that increase in diesel is the fact that while our economy in terms of personal mobility may have be down, our consumption and deliveries and other aspects of goods to us continue to arrive. So we think the combination of those two aspects have shown the increase in that. All that being said, these federal funds really largely are a backstop, and our analysis have shown that they really help us address kind of the gap that we've received or have noticed from the lack of revenue on the fuel side. So not really a surplus, really a backstop. So I think most of you have been watching at the national level a lot of discussions about future bills or additional stimulus, and we continue to monitor that as well. I think those were largely the items that I wanted to hit. Again, I really appreciate everyone working so diligently to see the plan to adoption. And I think Matt Meservey, our long-range planning director, may have a few announcements.
Yep, thanks, Preston. I did want to touch a little bit on the Urban Transportation Planning Grant status. As you know, we awarded one project to each MPO. We received 22 applications overall, and have announced those awards on our website, and you can find those on the TDOT website under the long range planning section. We're currently in the process of advertising through our on-call consultants for those 10 projects. We expect to receive proposals back by March 1st, and we'll evaluate those accordingly. But that's really all I wanted to bring up at this point.
Great. Thanks, Preston and Matt. Any questions for Preston or Matt or anything with TDOT?
Mayor Reed?
Yes, sir.
Billy Vogel. I had a question for Preston, and I may be out in left field on this, but it seems like we're all the time looking for funds. And that's, you know, we don't have a problem we couldn't fix if we didn't have the funds. But this in-state gambling we're doing now, and look like everybody in the state must be big on it because our numbers is leading the nation from what I see. And I'm hearing, or I read, where some of that funds that come into the state will be on infrastructure. Is there anything to that, Preston?
That is a good question. I will have to double check on that from my the department's chief financial officer. I'm not aware that I have not heard that come up in the discussions of the department's budget. However, there may be something there that I'm unaware of, but I most definitely will look into that for you.
Any other questions? Okay, thanks to you guys and TDOT. We'll now move on to the chair's report, and I just want you all to know how proud I am of the work that's been done over the last year with the Regional Transportation Plan, as well as all of the other day-to-day stuff that has to go on. I know we've all been through some really challenging times, but just like Preston and Mayor Moore said, there's still a lot more work that needs to be done to be able to solve our long-term transportation challenges, or opportunities, as some like to call it. And I really hope that this board, along with our other regional stakeholders, will continue to work together and collaborate with each other. And we can solve these long-term transportation challenges, but we can't do it alone. We can only do it by working together. I can't tell each one of you how much I've appreciated all of your work on this project. To our staff, I know we don't tell you enough how much we appreciate you and what a great job that you do, but I want each one of you to know what a difference you're making on countless numbers of citizens that live in our communities on a daily basis. There is no way we would have such a wonderful place to call home without the work and your leadership daily. To all of you that sit on the transportation board and to your staffs, thank you for the jobs that you do day in and day out. Each one of you are making Middle Tennessee and your individual communities a place where our citizens want to raise their families. You're giving your neighbors a place to call home. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate that. I think we all have options of where we choose to live. And I think many people are finding that the Middle Tennessee region is a great place to call home. And I think that is due to the fact of the work that each one of you are putting in. So with that, I will move on to our staff reports. Anna, I think you have something first.
Thank you again, Mayor Reed. And I apologize to everyone in advance for the repetition because both Pam and Preston have already touched on the COVID-19 relief funding. But just since we have some information that's a little different than last month when we reported out to you on this, I'll go ahead and just recap. That in our meeting last month, we mentioned that the most recent Consolidated Appropriations Act passed by Congress did include additional pandemic-related relief funding for transportation, totaling about $9.8 billion nationally. with Tennessee receiving around $210 million of that total. Last month, we also reported to you per a letter that we had received from TDOT that Tennessee metropolitan areas with populations over 200,000, so those large 4 MPOs would receive about $51.2 million, with the Nashville metro area receiving an estimated $18.2 million that could be made available for local projects. But however, in a subsequent letter that we received from TDOT, we were informed that those totals are actually $22.4 million for metropolitan areas and $7.9 million for our planning area. So for GNRC, that does mean around $10.3 million less than originally anticipated and reported to you last month. As Preston was mentioning, that $7.9 million we will receive. Those funds will be available at 100% federal share, so no local or state match will be required to use those dollars, and they do have that expiration date of September 30th, 2024. So again, and like Pam was saying too, at this time, we're still seeking concrete guidance on the exact eligibility of this funding and any potential requirements as they will pertain to the allocation among our members. So we'll continue to keep you guys informed as we gain that additional clarity and also work to propose a plan for the distribution of these funds. And that's it on that. Thank you.
Thanks, Anna. Sean, I think you're next.
Thank you. Only thing that I wanted to note, kind of picking up where Pam left off, is as we switch gears from the Regional Transportation Plan to the upcoming work plan, the Unified Planning Work Program, we'll be kicking off the development of that work program at next month's meeting. And so, start thinking about upcoming transportation planning activities and focus areas that you're interested in exploring for the region. And that's all that I have.
Great, thanks. Any questions for staff? Okay, under other, I know, Michael, you had a couple of items.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, everyone. Michael Skipper with the Greater Nashville Regional Council. Let me start off by just commending the Transportation Policy Board for the focus that you put on transportation planning during a really challenging year. I think Mayor Reed has said that well, but our staff really appreciates, given all that you have going on, continuing to pay attention to the transportation issue. We also appreciate your recognition that today's adoption of the plan isn't the finish line. It's just another important step in the long, winding journey towards transportation nirvana for Middle Tennessee. I believe we will get there at some point in the future, but I do commend you for your efforts this year, and I'm especially proud of the work of our GNRC team. Much of the work that you see at these regular meetings is done with in-house staff, planners, analysts, researchers, policy experts. So we're very proud of the material we bring to you, the analysis, but also the communication. So the executive summary that you're seeing today was also produced entirely in-house, and I want to commend Michelle for her efforts there. And a special shout out to Sean Falzer and his management of the transportation planning process at GNRC. A couple other things to share with you before we hop off. One, just a reminder, we have the GNRC Executive Board meeting getting started here momentarily at 11:30. You are all encouraged to stick around. You'll have to hop over to the new link, but stick around for that. To quickly preview the agenda, we've got a couple of business issues to get through, including a look at the results from our fiscal year 2020 independent financial audit. Probably the most important thing today, though, is going to be a look at the upcoming update to the Regional Economic Development Strategy. We've got the Regional Transportation Plan, but GNRC is also tasked with facilitating an economic development strategy for the region to make sure that public policy and investments in infrastructure are aligned with the shared vision for economic development and prosperity across Middle Tennessee. So stay tuned for information about how you can be plugged into that effort. And then for those of you who do not end up sticking around for that, though, I do want to let you know that we have welcomed our new Chief Legal Counsel to the team. Her name is Candy Henry. She's online with us here today. We'll be talking a little bit more about her at the executive board, but Candy started with us this week at the beginning of Snowpocalypse and is onboarding sort of. We're used to onboarding people remotely now, so that hasn't been that big of an issue, but we're really excited to have her. She's got a lot of experience with public agencies across Middle Tennessee, including the Nashville MTA and NES, to name a couple. So I just wanted to make that introduction. And otherwise, Mayor Reed, I look forward to seeing you all over at the executive board meeting.
Great, thanks, Michael. And we are so excited to have our new person on board. And any other business that needs to come before this board from anyone? Well, I just want to thank you for a great meeting today. I pray for everybody's safety over the next couple of days. I know we've had lots of employees in each one of our communities that have been putting in a lot of hours to keep our citizens safe, and I expect that's going to continue to happen over the next couple of days. But thank you all for being here today, and if there is nothing else, then we are adjourned until March 17th. Thank you.